In the 1800s, there's a story about farmers who would bring their apple carts to the town market, loaded with neatly piled fresh apples for sale. One could imagine the pride the farmer had, the amount of time and effort that had gone into his crop, and the care he had taken to stack this fragile fruit that can easily be bruised and spoiled by mishandling. The story goes that suddenly a clumsy townsman knocked over the farmer's cart, spilling not only the apples, but also spoiling the farmer's plans. The metaphor, flipping your apple cart, has since been used to describe when everything that we hold sacred and believe to be certain suddenly and unexpectedly upends. I believe this crisis is a natural rite of passage, something we must all go through, possibly several times in a lifetime. When my husband and I went to seminary, which is graduate school for those who go into some form of Christian ministry, it was an expected part of the process to have our apple carts flipped. You learn about your faith tradition, its history, where we got it right, where we got it wrong, followed by philosophical debates that force you to question what you believe, why you believe it, and how suffering is meant to challenge all of it. The idea was that it was better to upend your apple cart early than to find yourself in the marketplace making a fool of yourself when life and relationships flip it for you. Some didn't make it through this process, and perhaps that was the point. But for Matt and me, we had already had our apple carts flipped a couple of times by then. Thankfully, the first time by our professors in undergrad. One of those professors was Dr. Alice Cullinan, a religious education professor at a small backwoods college called Gardner-Webb University. Dr. Cullinan, or Dr. C as we affectionately call her, is a small but mighty powerhouse of intellectual and spiritual wisdom. She has shaped several generations of students who have passed through that college, most who never planned on ever taking a class about religious education, much less going on to become faith leaders. It seems like a majority of her students had a similar story of finding their way into a Cullinan classroom. You'd be sitting at a table with friends in the cafeteria and hear someone say, "Are you taking a Cullinan class?" "What's a Cullinan class?" you would ask. And your friend would simply say, "Oh man, you have to take one of Dr. Cullinan's classes. But be prepared to change your major. You can't take just one. Soon, you'll find yourself majoring or minoring in Dr. Cullinan." I have since had my apple cart turned several more times. Once was when Matt and I left church ministry to serve the military community. I came in with the obtuse idea that I had something to offer this gritty 1% of the American population, only to experience a community that lived out selfless service and loving your neighbor far better than anything I had ever seen in my faith culture growing up. It seemed I had much more to learn than to offer. Later, my apple cart turned again, inviting me to ask hard questions about my faith tradition when my family, now war-torn and in need of community, were the visitors rather than the leaders in the church. Most recently, I have found myself speechless and deeply grieved by our nation, not only divided, but pockets of the Christian culture I love, embracing Christian nationalism, hateful rhetoric, and blind loyalty to destructive and charismatic leaders, both in and out of the church. I have heard from so many of you that you too have found your apple carts turned, shifting your identity from Christian to Christ follower, so as to not be confused with those who live out Christ's message in a different, more destructive way. Almost 30 years later, I have often wondered what Dr. C would say about all of this, how she has navigated her relationship with God over the years, and craving her instruction once again, the wisdom she has now. As I pick up my apples again, disappointed in a community I've always known to be flawed, but still called to a higher level of loving their neighbor, I decided to interview Dr. C and share her with all of you. Now in her 80s, she is still writing, still teaching, and accepted my offer to help share more of her story. This is Restored, Stories of Conflict, Healing, and Peace. Well, I have been wanting to do this for a very long time. The spiritual formation that you provided to all of us was life changing. And I'm not just saying that. You taught so many powerful things that were really also very unique at a very formative time for students in their undergrad. It was everything from how to read scripture, how to listen to God, how to know God's will in your life, how to search your heart and to really examine your own life, how to ask hard questions before deciding whether or not you're going to go into ministry, like how to be careful if you do go into ministry. There was just so many unique things that you taught. And Matt and I actually, after Gardner-Webb, went on to seminary. So many of your students have done that as well. And as soon as we got into seminary, we were looking around the classroom and people were complaining about writing a 5-page paper. And we were like, oh my goodness, Dr. Cullinan and Stiebel and so many other people, we were writing 20-page papers in undergrad. So you prepared us well for seminary. And we have always said we had a better education and more spiritual formation in our undergrad than we even ever experienced in seminary. So I just want to say thank you for that. You have changed and just made such an impact on me personally, on my marriage, my practice with other people, and changing our family tree and how we've raised our kids. It's just, I know I'm fangirling, but there's just not enough thank you to. And I'm bringing all of that from your fellow students as well that I've just seen so much of over the years. We get together when we can get together and we all talk about, this is what Cullinan would say, or, and just reminisce. So again, thank you for being here. And I'm excited to ask you some questions.
It was such a privilege and it was really fun to work with you all. It really was.
Well, here's the thing. You taught a whole lot of people before you taught us. So maybe share a little bit about your story. What made you want to be a professor in the first place? I don't know if everybody knows your story. So kind of share a little bit, and then we'll kind of get into not only what you taught, but also maybe what you've seen, since then. But what got you into wanting to teach, especially religious education and spiritual formation?
Well, I became a Christian at age 19. I'd been brought up in the church and done the churchy kind of thing for a long time, but I had never really met the Lord personally. I did not know that you had to do that. And so I was introduced to the Lord and to that concept and accepted him at age 19. And a year later, I felt a call into ministry. And I didn't know what it would be doing, but I was following the Lord. And so I went to college and still didn't know what I would be doing. And went to seminary. I still didn't know what I would be doing, but just step by step, walking along with him, with the Lord. And after seminary, there were no doors of ministry open to me, and so I couldn't understand that. Here I'd gone through 6 years of study, and so I was quite distressed and distraught, and I had my ideas of what I felt like the Lord wanted me to do, and how wonderful I would be in such and such a place, if I could just serve that way. And all the doors were just closed. And what I didn't know at the time was he was working on me to be willing to do what he wanted me to do, which was to take a job in a church doing 4 different things. I had studied to be a religious educator, so I could see myself in a nice big church, serving on staff and doing all the nice religious education things that I had been taught to do. And none of those doors opened. And finally, after 6 months of praying and crying and wondering and doubting and searching, I got an opportunity to serve in a little church. And remember, I thought it'd be a big church. In a little church, you might be interested to know this. I don't even know if you know this. It was in Quantico, Virginia.
Really?
And Triangle there, and a lot of military people. About a third of the church would change every year when the orders came. But they wanted me to be the minister of music, the minister of education, the ministry of youth, and the ministry of children, and preschoolers, by the way, too. So I've always said up to that time I would never be crazy enough to take a multiple job, like that. But after 6 months of preparation, I think I was willing to dig ditches or whatever, So I took it, and was a good experience. I had a lot to learn. But after about 4.5 years, I was sitting in worship service one morning. It was the second service, and I was a minister of music, so we'd had the first service. I listened to what the preacher said, so it's the second service now, okay? I already knew what he was going to say, and so my mind was kind of wandering a little bit. And it's hard to explain exactly, but some way, somehow, in the middle of that service, I heard the voice of God tell me, I want you to teach. Mm-hmm. And that's the way my reaction was. I did not know what that meant or whatever. And so I began seeking and praying about that and talking with former professors. And they said, if you're going to teach, you need to prepare so that no doors will close on you. And if you think it's difficult for women now in ministry, it was a whole lot more difficult back then. But I knew I had to go and get the PhD if I wanted to teach in school. And so that was my calling. And to make a long story short, through various obstacles, challenges, open doors, waiting on men to realize that women could serve as a professor in a college, I wound up at Gardner-Webb. And so that was how I got there.
Well, and can I ask you, because you brought up, and this is something that I was going to ask you anyways later, because one of your former students specifically wanted you to address that topic, because like you said, it was so much harder for women maybe back then than it is today. And yet women are still continuing to struggle to feel like their gifts or their talents are welcomed, are valued. What helped you then navigate those obstacles and stay on the path and not abandon it or give up, or fight? Did you fight? Like, how did you fight? Like, there's so many questions that I have there, but there's still a lot of women that would love to learn from you and learn to know how do they navigate that themselves.
I believe in life, we come up against all kinds of obstacles and difficulties. And it's interesting that the prejudice is out there, okay? Strong beliefs and need to be right about our own positions are out there. And when you cover that with a religious facade, it's sort of like discrimination and prejudice is even more heart-rending when then the people who are doing it say, well, I believe that God is telling me to do that, that we believe that the Bible teaches this, or we believe that God says this, and you realize that God is not leading you the same way, then you've got a problem there. One of the things that I try to tell women, and I try to tell myself, is that if I'm faithfully walking with God and doing what I believe He tells me to do, He will either open the way and the door for me to go through, or He will give me the grace to either wait until it opens. But my mission is to not be obnoxious in the meantime. And at times, all of us get angry or we get impatient. And the worst thing that I've seen among women in ministry is to try to force people to accept them and to force people to believe that they need to have an open heart and door. It first confronted me when I was at Gardner-Webb. We got to work part-time. Well, by the way, it confronted me before I got to Gardner-Webb, because for an entire year, and I teased them about it, but the men in the department were looking for someone to teach religious education. Only they were just looking for men. They had not considered a woman. And back in that time, it's just like, I don't know why it wasn't on their radar. They just would never even consider that. So the Lord let them look for a whole year and find no man that could feel that. In the meantime, he had me, and I don't have to go into all that, but he had things for me to learn and do that were preparing me to be a better teacher. So he was working on them and he was working on me. So there was that prejudice, really. That was a prejudice. But finally, the Lord got through to them, hey, maybe we could see if there's even a woman out here that could do that, So I wound up, I teased them about it a whole lot, but I wasn't on staff, but probably 2 years before. And we got to teach part-time in churches. I was always either a minister of music or a minister of education or something in a church, because I felt like I shouldn't just be in the academy telling you all what to do, and I'm not out there trying it and seeing what worked and what didn't work. And I can bring a real live demonstration to you in class and say, hey, look, you better watch it when you're working with a nominating committee. Let me tell you what happened, So I always felt it, but it was in one of the first churches I was in. I was minister of music. What I usually did was they hired me to be minister of music, and then I was minister of education for free on the side, because I couldn't see all the minister of education needs and do nothing about it. And so I was actually hired to be the minister of music. But anyway, after I'd been there a couple of years, another church asked me if I wanted them to ordain me. That I had never been ordained as a woman. And I asked the pastor where I was if it would be okay if this other church ordained me. And he said to me, after he talked with his leadership, if you are ordained, you cannot serve in this church. Mm. And so immediately I was confronted again with that whole issue of ordination. And after much thought and prayer, I realized that I didn't need to be ordained by man. I was already ordained by God to do what I was doing, and it wasn't required. Sure, I couldn't perform a marriage ceremony or anything, but that was okay. But it would hurt that church more, for me to leave over that issue. And so I simply told the other church, I'm sorry, I will not do that. I've had other people, other churches, and and I'm all for women being ordained. That's no problem. But I just wanted to give that an example, is that sometimes when we face prejudice, you have to see what is the greater good here. I've known of some women who just broke my heart because they were so bullheaded that they were going to force something to happen because they were not willing to wait to see. Mm. So I don't know if that answers it. I know you had about...
No, that's so beautiful. And I'm really grateful for the example that you just described. And you used the word, I think you said, don't be obnoxious. I think is that the word. And so I was going to ask you, you kind of started in on this and maybe just kind of dialing in just a little bit more. What practically kept you from becoming obnoxious yourself?
I think really at the bottom, maybe the foundation of my life is my extreme gratitude that the Lord confronted me as a 19-year-old and offered me a life that was truly different and truly, well, the religious term would be abundant living. A life that matters, a life that counts, a life that's not wasted. And he gave me two mentors in that first year of my Christian life who grounded me in the scriptures. But in that grounding was also information on how to walk with the Lord on a personal basis. A lot of people think Christianity is a bunch of rules of what you do and what you don't do. And it's a religion like a lot of other religions, but it is not. When the Lord met me at that lumber company where I was working, I wasn't in church. I didn't go to a revival meeting, I was working, and there was a person there at the lumber company who, in fact, I often don't talk about this much because I don't want to put the reflection on me. I wanted to be on the Lord. But I was actually so depressed and distraught at that time in my life that I left my office and go to my car with the determination I was going to get in it, drive away from the office, get out on the highway, go as fast as I could, and run into a tree or a pole and kill myself. My emptiness was so great and my pain was so severe. And when the Lord intervened and had me go over to the nurse's station, and she was a believer, and I had never talked to her, but I had observed her life. And when she explained to me what Christianity was all about, but that it was the Lord who wanted to be a part of my life. And the religious term, of course, is born again, born from above, yielded to the Lord. It became a lifestyle then, and it was a relationship. And so through the years, I've learned how to deepen that relationship. And just like you and your husband, you met, you had a degree of love, but then you started walking together. And as you both learned more about each other, and as you both had ups and downs and ins and outs and love and trouble, it's a depth that you now know that you did not know then. So sure, there are things you learn to help with that, but basically, and it might sound trite, but it's really not. The struggles that I have faced, and I have faced tremendous struggles. People, a lot of times, because the Lord has blessed me so much, they don't realize what He had to do to me to get me to that place. And whether it's at the side of my father's, bedside of my father, I, as his chief caregiver, watching him die from cancer, whether there are other things I could say, but what I'm saying is a lot of times people think, you have not faced what I've faced. I haven't, but I have faced plenty. But each time I knew to whom I could go, and I can't stop this part of the conversation without saying the basic disciplines of the Christian life of feasting on the Word of God and spending time in relationship and talking and praying and listening to the Lord is really what keeps your boat afloat. not only afloat, but joyful.
I'm aware that someone is listening to this interview and might feel uncomfortable. Maybe you were not expecting to hear a faith-based episode. Maybe you have a different faith tradition. Or this is the culture you grew up in and have become disillusioned by. Wherever you are, I invite you to linger a bit longer, not because I'm trying to convince you of something, but because all of us at some point will have to differentiate what we believe from our experience of it in the world. Dr. C had the most intriguing classes, the psychology of religion, and Religious Education 101, which explored the foundations of your faith and developing the disciplines of prayer, hearing God, and deep soul searching. A cult favorite, pun intended, was her cults class, exploring toxic faith, the danger and pull of charismatic and toxic faith leaders, and how all of us are capable of becoming one. Part of the fun of that class was how we called ourselves Cullinites, following our influential leader, Dr. C, as she taught us, tested us, and hopefully passed us at the end of the semester. Each class required you to fill up a 3-inch notebook with handouts, tools, your papers, and content she had researched and curated over the years. Some of those notebooks have been valued at hundreds of dollars, although I've not known anyone to sell one. You can find many of her students, however, still asking each other where that handout is for how to know the will of God, or her time for a checkup assignment that was created to deeply search your heart and mind for ways your sin and pride have blocked hearing the voice of God. That has since become one of many of her books that you can find on Amazon. And don't worry, a link is in the show notes.
You really did model for us in the classroom, even that you would start every class with a devotional. You would start it with prayer. You would walk us carefully into each lesson. You were very intentional with us, but you were also very intentional with the kind of classes that you felt like we needed. You provided very interesting classes like the psychology of religion, cults classes, learning those spiritual disciplines like I talked about before. They were just very different classes that I don't know if any other institution was really teaching at the time. And that's the other reason why you didn't send us on a path that every other institution maybe was sending people into ministry with. It felt like you were preparing us, that you were protecting us, that you were teaching us some things that you thought that we needed to know before we went out into the world. And so what was your thought about why we needed those classes, these specific, like psychology of religion, which just today still fascinates me. The cults class, we had fun with it. You called us your Cullinites. We all became Cullinites during the cults class. It was just a lot of fun. So share a little bit about why you felt like those were important classes. And I would love to know, was that easy to convince the institution to teach those classes? Like, how did that happen?
Okay. One of the reasons I'm laughing is one of the classes that I enjoyed so much was the Introduction to Religious Education. That's the one that got named Conviction 101. I don't know if you remember that.
I remember that.
I felt so keenly responsible to help equip or try to equip you for what I knew what you were going to face when you got out there. And that had to do with good mental health and emotional health, as well as spiritual health, physical health, interpersonal relationships, etc. I think, and let me say this, and I'm hoping by sharing my story earlier, like you, that I didn't scare off anybody. Today, we have a lot of religious talk going on, and we have a lot of what I call religiosity and it's really nauseating, really. If you I know it turns off an awful lot of people, and I certainly don't want to do that. I I think if there's nothing else, I think we need to not hide behind our faith, or let's say be afraid to share our faith. But we have to be careful because people are suspicious. I mean, I don't know how many weeks go by that there's some other great religious leader that has blown it by running off with his girlfriend, or we found this one who has been molesting girls, ever since he was at that church or something. It's a wonder anybody has anything to do with Christianity. We have such bad examples for what it's all about. So it's hard to know when to speak and when to not speak, really, when to. But why I picked those classes, I think, was your question. Because of what I had studied and what I had seen in my own life and others, I thought, now, what's the best way I can help these? I called y'all little chickadees. I don't know if you remember that or not. My little chickadees are going to need when they get out there in the real world, And do you remember the time machine that I brought to class? I don't know if you remember that or not. It was a little box, and on it you could set the dial for what things were going to be like 20 years after you graduated. And I had you one at a time come and look in the box to see what your future was going to be like. And in it, in the back was a mirror with a sign over it said that you are becoming now what you will be then. And what I was trying to convey at that particular time was these things that I'm teaching you now, the basic stress management, understanding codependency and family dynamics and all the things that we talked about, as well as the spiritual things. If you get them now and start practicing them now, then 30 years from now, you will look back and see that they really did help you with mountains and valleys and difficulties and joys. I just felt so responsible to share and so privileged to be able to share that with you.
You've always had these very interesting, fun examples, like turning everybody into Cullinites during the cults class,
Right.
I remember we would go out on the campus, find a place that was quiet, and it was just literally doing a spiritual inventory on your heart, on your mind, on your emotions, and pairing that with scripture so that you would come out of that checkup, if you will, really having more clarity on sin in your life, what blocks you from hearing God's voice, maybe hearing God's voice a little clearer, but at least it taught us to do our due diligence on examining our hearts so that we could hear God more clearly and not accidentally follow our own ideas, our own wants, and instead bringing that in alignment with God. And so I agree with you. That first class, it was like, woo, watch out for that first class, because you think you're going in there to just take a class, but what you were actually going into is like you're going through a major overhaul.
Right.
Would you have taught anything different? Is there something that you know now that you wish that you could have taught us back then?
Honestly, I don't.
I love that.
And I really don't. I don't. That might sound really weird, but it's. I just had such a wonderful, and I attribute that to the Lord's grace and mercy, really, and the fact that when He said, "I want you to teach," and I said, "Yes, I will," then He said, "I know this is going. I know that He planned that I would know what to teach and when to teach and how to teach. And what people don't realize is that I am an introvert and have always been extremely nervous to speak before people. And for me to be one that he said, I want you to teach, he might as well have said, I want you to jump off of a bridge and fly, because in my own nature, I would not want to do that. I mean, I couldn't even speak in class in high school to present a report. I was a basket case, you know, and my voice would give away. And I thought, how could I ever teach? And then when I found out in college, you know, so to me, I'm a good representation of what the Lord can do with a lump of clay, who puts it in his hands, and he says, okay, now I'm going to do wonderful things. And let me tell you one wonderful thing he's doing right now that I never would have dreamed. He is allowing a book, in fact, more than one book, but right now one major book on deacon training. It has been translated in 5 languages. We found out 2 weeks ago that it's going to be distributed in Antioch, Turkey.
Wow.
Which is where they first called the believers Christians. And you read it in the book of Acts. In Antioch, they were first called Christians. To think that a little book could be translated and sent to Antioch from Boiling Springs, does that not bless your heart? And we learned just in fact, this Wednesday, that one of our books, this major book on deacon training, which is really an overview of Christian education under the title, is going to probably wind up in Argentina. It's now in Armenia. We're sending 2 guys on a mission team there. I just was texting this morning from people in Turkey who want the book Power and a Promise, which is another one I wrote, which is How to Claim God's Promises. It's been translated, will be printed this week, and be given out to women all across the country of Turkey. And I think that could a little 19-year-old who said, yes, I want Jesus to come into my heart, ever have imagined the journey that she would take? And at 86, he's still using this little tired, worn out teacher to spread his word all over the world. And if that's not a God thing, I don't know what is.
It is. And I'm not surprised that you have not only continued to be willing, but that God would continue to just open up your circle of influence. And so it's beautiful to hear that. You taught us a lot about toxic faith systems, toxic leaders, how we could become toxic leaders if we don't know how to do that inventory. You taught us how to examine how different institutions can twist faith in a way that is manipulative and harmful, how to recognize that. And you even asked us to go to some of these services that were maybe not dangerous, but they were just different services, and look for and identify in the world where we might see some of that psychology or that manipulation happening. And we're starting to see in our culture today, the evangelical church has evolved since I was there at Gardner-Webb with you. And like you said earlier, we're seeing people being more and more hesitant about the Christian faith because of maybe how it's being used in different ways. I think I would just like to ask you, because you and I have not talked about this ever since I was even at Gardner-Webb, What has your thoughts been as you've seen the evangelical church evolve over time? Um, we don't have to necessarily get into politics, but as you've seen it, as we've all seen it, kind of meld or mesh more with politics. But I just have been wondering, especially since you taught us so much of that early on, what your experience has been since then watching the church evolve.
It's heartbreaking, really. I mean, it's terribly heartbreaking. Religion has always been a tool that some have used to control. It's been a tool that's been used to elevate oneself. You can go back and read on the pages of Scripture how Jesus was pretty upset with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the religious leaders, and that shows up and has through centuries. I mean, it's just takes on a little bit different face at times, but when you think about, all you have to do really is read the interaction between the Pharisees, the religious hierarchy of that day, and what Jesus said you shouldn't be doing. You might as well be watching it on news today or reading it in a newspaper. I think he gives very specific warnings to us about what true faith is. I think as I walk with him and as I read the scriptures, and I would suggest that to you and anybody, does this seem what the scripture's teaching, the way they are acting, reacting, abusing, controlling? One of the things that I've learned, and I was so thankful the Lord led me to study psychology right along with religion all through my undergraduate, graduate, and PhD, because I think they help each other. And so when you get insight into how people are made up psychologically and emotionally, then you can see how religion can either help or hurt that. I've seen, well, I don't like to call Christianity a religion, because to me it's not just another religion. It's a relationship. I'm trying to see how the best way to focus this. I think anything that anybody else does or anything that I do or say that is, this sounds so trite, but I believe it's true. If that's not the way the Lord would react, then I better not do it. Now, at times, he reacted very strongly, and I do want to advise you on this, because the word obnoxious, we can be obnoxious. We can be obnoxious in the way we speak to people and react to people and try to control people. But there are times when we need to be an Amos prophet of the Old Testament and speak out bluntly and harshly and directly, even if it means we'll be stoned. I did give it my best shot, and I'm not saying all this so that people run out and buy the books, but I'm trying to put stuff down that you're asking me into print, so that long after I'm gone, hopefully, the Lord can still use it to help people. And one of the books that I mentioned to you is called Is That You, God? Understanding How God Speaks. And so I think this is so critical. When I'm confronted with a difficulty, I need to know whether God is telling me to shut up or to speak up. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I want to shut up when he says speak up. And sometimes I want to speak up when he says shut up. And so the key is, I want to understand all of this stuff that's going on. And I'm always asking him, give me your discernment, Lord, because I'm not smart enough to figure it out. But I tell you, you learn some things right off and you see, oh, this is dreadful, this is dreadful. And I see it in our culture today. I really do.
There's a lot of Christians who grew up in their faith tradition and who have really wrestled with watching their faith tradition make some of the decisions that they have, maybe watching those faith leaders fall in some way or have a moral failing. And so a lot of people are dissecting their faith, maybe even leaving the church. I've heard the word unbundling, just trying to unbundle their faith from cultural traditions, cultural patterns of things that they were taught that feel unhealthy to them now. And I've seen a lot of people leave the institution and just start home churches, or just they're navigating, trying to figure out. The new word is, I don't want to be a Christian. I want to be a Christ follower. That's what I'm hearing people start to say more than ever is, I don't think I can call myself a Christian. I think what I really am is a Christ follower, and I'm trying to figure out what that is. And as they're trying to navigate these new waters, maybe even outside the institution, they're watching the church continue to make certain decisions, or leaders making certain decisions, and it can feel very confusing. You can even have, and I'll even speak for myself, you can even have these thoughts of like, am I doing the wrong thing? And not knowing where is God in all of this, and not wanting to be wrong. And so I guess the question is as we're watching the church make those decisions, how part of it is the discernment process, maybe, and trying to examine, and is what I'm seeing actually good and kind and loving, joyful, gentle, like all the fruits of the Spirit, right? And is that an appropriate way to look at the church and look at what's happening in society to help us navigate those really hard questions of what do I do now in my life and in my faith?
I don't have any trouble with, and I do understand why a person would say, I don't want to call myself a Christian. I want to be a Christ follower. Those should not be different.
Mm-hmm.
And see what the person is really saying. I don't like what I see in some people who are calling themselves Christians. They don't seem to be following Christ. So that's what I hear.
That's what I think I'm hearing too. Mm-hmm.
You know, and when they say that, and so what they need to do first of all is to realize that they've made a better choice. But if the person who's living a Christian life is not living as a Christ follower, they shouldn't be calling themselves a Christian, because the term means like Christ, you know. And so what I'm hearing them say is, I am so upset that people who call themselves Christians are not like Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do I do? Okay, to me, the number one decision is, I'm going to be a Christ follower. So I like that. And what they're also saying is, I don't know what that's going to look like, because all I know is how it's been done, and how I was brought up. And so it can be pretty scary. And so I understand the problem. Now, getting out of the problem is just like you as a counselor, you would know somebody comes and they dump all this stuff on you, and it's all very much of a big weight. And they want you to say, okay, give me one thing to do this week to fix it. When you know it's going to be a pretty long process. They're going to have to untangle some stuff and try some other stuff. And then if that doesn't work, and you as a counselor understand it's a process. but you give them some keys and tools to start the process, and you give them encouragement, and they learn, they try some things that doesn't work, so they try some other things. That very same principle works with spiritual growth. They've got a lot of mess that people did to them or they did to themselves. They got tangled, and it's all called, in their mind right now, Christian or evangelical or whatever. And they don't like it. And they would hope, well, I'm going to do one thing, and that's going to untangle all that. That's going to fix it.
Which I think for most is to just leave. And now they're,
yeah. Absolutely. But that does not work either.
Yeah.
And there's something always going to be missing inside. Now they do need to dump all the bad stuff, but a lot of them don't know how to then get the good stuff. They don't understand. I think if I had to put it down into one basic issue, Corie, I think it is there has been complete confusion for so many years that Christianity is a relationship with the Lord and not adopting a tradition and a list of rules and regulations. Because when I walk with the one who made me, who saved me, who can lead me, isn't that different than just trying to follow what other people have done or said or whatever? It is the key that will make a difference in your whole life. Now, there's still stuff that's tangled up in there because we're humans. We've had parents who were not perfect. We had influences that were not perfect. We have messed up. We have let ourselves down, our families down, our God down. People have hurt us. So we're a mess, really. I mean, humans are a mess. Everybody ought to realize that. But the only one that can really help us, and it's an inside helper when I ask him to come in and be Lord of my life, then he says, okay, now we will start the process, and we will start untangling, and we will add the good. So I like what the person concluded, but I hope they understand what that means, and finding that. And if they truly do follow the Lord, he'll help them with that. I think one of the things that has helped me along the Christian journey, besides my spiritual disciplines, is really realizing the brokenness and the woundedness of all of us. We're all broken. We're all wounded. We've all failed. We've all messed up royally. But there is a healer and a comforter and a counselor and a teacher. If I'll just put my hand in his, then he will begin to undo and to heal and to teach. And it's wonderful. I hope I have helped some along the way learn a little bit about how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. You have. I think had we not learned what we learned from you during those formative years, we would have been so much more wounded going out into the world. I think it served as the most incredible protective mechanism to go into church, to go into working with other Christian leaders, becoming whatever a Christian leader is, maybe in other people's eyes. But I think as we've experienced the brokenness of ourselves, but also other people, it's almost like we've been able to recognize something out in the distance before it became too destructive, because you taught us to see the fruits of the Spirit. You taught us to see scripture and faith being used in healthy ways versus unhealthy ways. And so it was an incredible protective mechanism, I know, for our life, for sure. And in many ways, for a lot of the students that we went to school with, that is probably the number one thing we talk about when we do get together is, wow, we navigated the landscape with such a rich understanding ahead of time that we were able to call things out for what they were pretty quickly. And I can't imagine going into the world not having had that instilled in us. So let's talk a little bit about your life since I've seen you at Gardner-Webb. What do you feel like is some of the biggest things that you have been growing in and learning in, let's say, maybe the last 10 years? Like, what would you say if there was a theme, if there was something that God has really been working with you on? What is that?
Early on, he taught me this, but I think it's been brought to my mind here lately in the past 10 years. That inside of us really is the old nature and the new nature. If we're truly a Christian, we have weaknesses and we have strengths, and we have spiritual power and we have natural power. And I think what he's tried to teach me, and I'm still learning it, is that healing never removes what has happened to you, but healing empowers you to go beyond what has happened to you. And let me see if I can give you an example. Well, let's just say a traumatic experience of some sort, or the trauma of living with alcoholism. My mother was an alcoholic. You never get over the damage, but the Lord can heal you in such a way that you can move on in spite of the damage. But also, in the past 10 years, I've realized that there is more to us than, I used to say this all the time, I will run out of life before I run out of lessons he's trying to teach me. I will always have more he wants to heal, but my life's going to run out before it can get it all done. Does that make any sense? Also, I think that you can never let your guard down. This is an important one. I think this is why and I could name names, and it's not important, but some pretty well-known religious leaders who did not learn the fact that their old nature was still alive and well, and they thought because they'd been a pastor for 40 years and they were in the hierarchy of the convention or whatever, that they didn't have to worry about temptation or lust or weaknesses or whatever. And so whenever I hear about it, I'm not surprised. I'm heartbroken. One of them was a former student, Corie, and this person really got really high in the convention. And I remember talking with him as a student and saying, and he shared with me some of his struggles. And I said, look, you need to realize that you will always have this in your old nature, and you've got to always be aware, always stay strong spiritually. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You should hear that. And I thought, now, 30 years later, his life is shipwrecked, his ministry's gone down the tube. And I thought, you did not continue to listen to that word of advice. You thought, well, after 30 years, I'm safe. But no. Philip Yancey's one of them. I mean, that's just really out there. And he wasn't one of my students, but here, and so other well-known ones that I could tell you. So it has just been brought to my mind, not only in my own life, but in others. I do not trust myself to never do what I would say I would never do. I trust the Lord that He'll keep me from doing what I said I would never do. Do you follow what I'm saying?
If you stay close with Him and need Him.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really powerful.
It depends.
You brought up that there's more lessons to be learned. Has your perspective of suffering changed over the years?
Well, on the perspective of suffering, one thing is that we live in a fallen world. Things that our forefathers did and decided affect us. Germs are out there, accidents are out there, etc. I think one question is what do I do? What scriptures help me when I suffer? I think at different times, different scriptures help. I have made a habit of coloring scriptures with softly colored pencils. For instance, if I'm suffering because of what somebody else said or did to me, emotional suffering, and I'm fretting over it, I'll turn to Psalm 37, which says, "Do not fret," and it tells you why not to fret. Also, Philippians 4. Those are what I call the anti-fret chapters. Depending on what I'm going through. I remember this was a very, very critical time in my life when actually I was being threatened. My life was being threatened. This is probably long after y'all left. And he was going to kill me. And so that kind of fear, threat, and all the ramifications. I may or may not write about that one day. That was an extremely tough time. But Psalm 119, which is the longest book in the Old Testament, I found when I got into that psalm and voiced that psalm, it helped me in calming down me and my fear during that kind of suffering. Physical suffering, things now that I'm going through as old age, suffering. They're just different verses. So I would suggest that people begin compiling these before they hit the suffering and have them in your mind, but also then I can just open my Bible and I'll see where I've colored verses that would help in suffering. So I don't know if that would help you or not.
I love that, the anti-fret chapter. I'm going to be looking at that.
Right.
You mentioned colored pencils, and that's definitely one of the things that you taught us and have taught a lot of people about how to use colored pencils, highlighters, different approaches like that. Describe, if you don't mind, what a typical day looks like for you, specifically your time in Scripture with the Lord. Is there something that you do consistently every day, or you make sure is a part of your day to make sure that you are staying close with God?
Right. I've done this ever since I was a college student and before, and have more time now, which is even wonderful. I always make sure that I have time in the morning before I go out to face my day, that I have at least time. When it's a really busy day, it might just be one song and one chapter and some time of prayer. Right now, because of the luxury of time that I have, I spend all morning in study and prayer and worship. And it's just such a blessing. And so I would say the minimum that anybody ought to do is one song. That sort of prepares our hearts to hear. And even just a few verses, if a person wants to read a devotion, I put devotions on Facebook every day. They seem to be blessing people, the busy people. But just it's sort of like setting your clock early so that you're on task all day long. I used to do it when I was a new Christian in the evening, and then it dawned on me, well, you're putting on the armor of God and going to bed. You had to put the armor on early in the morning, so you're going out and you fight your fights. You've got the armor on, which is your Bible study and prayer and helmet and all that kind of stuff. So typical day for me is in the morning, worship and study, prayer, and late morning, probably writing some. But I have meetings, schedules, appointments. I teach 2 Bible studies, so I'm designing a lot of Bible studies during the week. I do some desktop publishing. I do a lot of stuff.
It sounds like you're also giving yourself grace for the other seasons of your life where you were busier and couldn't spend all morning in it. And I think that sounds important too. You've mentioned your books that you've written, which I'm going to put links in the show notes to all of your books so that people can access those. Another student wanted me to ask you, what are your top 3, just off the top of your head, maybe something you've read recently, top 3 books that you would recommend for people to read that you've not written?
I realize that I have been a reader all my life, all my Christian life especially, but even before that, I probably read thousands of books. And every single book I read, I get something out of it. But there have been some that came at strategic times in my life. Now, some of them I passed along to you and made you all read them, and I'd read it and I think, oh, that's really good. Now we got to use that as a textbook next time, which is tremendous. I've got about 100 books that are on my shelves in my bedroom right now that are kind of the treasures, because when I left Gardner-Webb, I had to give away all those I didn't have. I had hundreds of them there. And I went to the association. I took some over there. Then I had to give those away when I retired. So, but the ones that impacted me the greatest, I would say, spiritually, the ones would be from Andrew Murray and Watchman Nee, those teaching me about the old nature and the new nature. For years, I thought I had to change the old nature and make it better. Mm-hmm. And you can't. You really can't. It takes the empowerment of the new nature to overcome the old nature. And so when I saw the freedom of letting him make me what he could make me and not having to do it myself, that is tremendous freedom, very much freedom. I've read a lot of books on prayer. Andrew Murray has a lot of, I'm reading one now, and his is a devotional guide on intercessory prayer that is just powerful. So Andrew Murray, Watchman Nee, Dallas Willard, I love his renovation of the heart. And recently they've put together one that, from his writings, by the way, that he did not publish, but they published after he died, The Scandal of the Kingdom. And it's dealing with the parables of Christ. And it is really powerful. It has blessed me tremendously. And I'm going to be rereading it, I'm sure, because there's a lot of the parables, there's a lot of stuff in there that you just don't get at face value until you do deeper. There was a time in my life, this was back when they first understood codependency. And so books by Melody Beatty and some of the codependent writers, Untangling Relationships, some of the things that I use at school, helped me to realize the power that my mother's alcoholism and my 2 grandfathers' alcoholism, how that had affected me psychologically. And that was very freeing to understand all the codependency stuff. Since I retired, I spent 12 years at our Baptist Association here in town, teaching and training and, trying to plant the seeds out there. I started a ministry called Lamplighters Ministries and have been writing again, trying to put in written form now. And I think I've written about 23 books or something, and I'm on 24 or whatever it is. I'm finishing up one right now. How to listen to God and the keys to effective prayer. And the one I'm working on now is Bible study. I did some fun ones. I don't even know if you don't mind, I'll just share a couple of them with you. Of course, this is one that you all had to do, Time for a
Checkup. Yes.
And such a basic book. But I've written some little mini books that deal with worry and loneliness and depression and forgiveness. And this one, when you're having trouble forgiving yourself, others, or God, and so this is what I've been doing, but also I've been doing some fun things. You might know my little Tommy
Tommy the tomato. Yes.
Yes, little Tommy tomato. And I've always wanted to do this, and so these are pictures that I took and little captions and stuff. I put these on Facebook every day. I put one on Facebook every day, but I also, you may or may not know that I wrote a little book about philosophy that I learned from my pups. That's for fun. And I wrote 2 mysteries. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've read the one, The Curse of the $20 Bill or not, but that one, a lot of it is, if you had the psycho-religion class, you would, some of the things that are in there are taken right out of experiences in the psychology religion class. But
I just so appreciate you giving time and your wisdom. It's so encouraging and grounding and calming to hear your voice, but also to hear your wisdom, and also hear things that you taught us 30 years ago that are still so true today. It's just a reminder that you set us on the right course so long ago. And going back to what you said about the other student, if we would just remember to do the practices that you taught us. And there's a lot of people listening that maybe didn't have this kind of teaching in their life. And so I'm so grateful that you're putting so much of this into book form where people have access to it. Back then, we had the Cullinan notebooks, which I don't know if you remember this, were pretty popular. And somebody somewhere along the way found out that they were going for about $1,000 a binder if somebody was willing to copy them and share them, which was really hard to do because there's a lot of personal stuff that you would have in your binder of your own work that you did. And really, there was no way to replicate a whole semester of working on yourself. So thank you for that. So you're going to answer these as quick as you can.
Okay.
Your thoughts on the word awesome.
Well, you may have remembered back in class that I said that awesome ought to be a word that's reserved when you're talking about God and what he does only. And I'm still on that soapbox, and you can ask some of my Sunday school class members right now. They'd say, awesome. I said, only if it's about God. Don't use it otherwise. Use other words like stupendous or marvelous or wonderful,
Just not awesome. Not awesome. Right. Okay. How would you answer if somebody came to you and said, how do I know what God's will is for my life?
The first question is to ask him.
How do I know if I'm hearing God's voice or my voice?
There are tips, and I've got a good book on the topic you can buy.
What is one thing that if you walked into a church and you saw this one thing, it would make you run away?
Oh my goodness. There's so many things. Probably a manipulative pastor.
What is one of your favorite memories from teaching?
Having you all over for cookouts.
What's one thing you miss about teaching college students?
It was just so much fun, really. It's so rewarding to do it. I mean, it really is. To see the light come on in your faces when you saw something.
Do you have a funny memory that makes you laugh still?
Well, yeah, I'll just tell you, one of them was yours, is when you and Matt came into my office with this exciting news that you had, and I don't know if it was him or you, and I didn't even know y'all had been dating or anything, and y'all both are just so much fun and just clowning around all the time and joking. I couldn't believe a thing either one of you said, especially your husband, Matt. And he came in there and I think he said, I want to let you know that Corie and I are going to get married. And I wanted to say and almost said, sure you are, And I was so glad I didn't, because you were serious and I thought you were just pulling another joke on me. I don't know if you even remember doing that.
I do a little bit.
At the beginning of this episode, I said that reconnecting with Dr. C was about craving her wisdom in a world that feels very different than the one I was preparing to enter 30 years ago. I'm so thankful for her wisdom today, but it also came with the reminder that maybe the world isn't actually that different after all. The marketplace has always been unpredictable, and she was preparing us long ago for how all people are capable of letting us down. More importantly, we are capable of the same. The Christ she taught me to listen to and to look for also hasn't changed. He was willing to overturn a few tables himself, but also wash the feet of his friends and offer mercy to the poor in spirit. What's actually changed is me. I've been to the marketplace more times now. I've had my cart flipped by people I trusted, by institutions I believed in, by a culture that co-opted the Christ I follow for purposes that would make him flip tables all over again. It has been enough that I found myself not knowing, like Dr. Cullinan said, whether to speak up or shut up. And honestly, both carry risks in the marketplace today. When you've been in the marketplace long enough to get bruised, it is easy to pay more attention to the noise than the still quiet voice she taught us to listen to years ago. Cullinan's assignment, Time for a Checkup, was the homework from her Religious Education 101 class that resulted in us nicknaming the class Conviction 101. It was designed to be a spiritual exercise to teach you how to search your heart and mind for anything that blocks your ability to hear God or feel his presence. You were instructed to find a quiet place where you could be alone, still yourself, read scripture, and slowly face what was within. How easy it is to confuse or lead ourselves astray. How much easier it is to focus on others more than the voice of the one who made you and the marketplace. There, in the quiet, you discover it was never about the apples. It has always been instead about the kind of farmer he is shaping you to become. This is Restored, stories of conflict, healing, and peace.